Chrysippus, the architect of Stoic logic. After the defiance of Diogenes, we now enter a world of precision and structure, a world shaped not by rebellion, but by reason. At its center stands Chrysippus of Soli, the brilliant mind who gave Stoicism its intellectual backbone. If Zeno planted the seeds of Stoic thought, it was Chrysippus who tended the garden. He built its foundations, refined its principles, and transformed Stoicism from a simple philosophy into a complete system of thought. Chrysippus believed that the universe was governed by logos, a divine rational order. To live in harmony with this order, one must understand it, and to understand it, one must reason clearly. For Chrysippus, philosophy was not just about living well, it was about thinking well. He developed a rigorous system of logic, more advanced in some ways than even Aristotle's. His work on propositional logic, the logic of if-then statements, became the cornerstone of Stoic reasoning. He taught that sound thinking leads to sound living. If we can train the mind to see clearly, we can train the soul to stay calm, no matter what life brings. But Chrysippus wasn't only concerned with abstract logic. He believed philosophy had to touch ethics, physics, and theology. He argued that the entire cosmos was a single, living being, a vast, rational organism, where everything happens according to divine reason. Our job, as rational beings, is to align ourselves with this cosmic order, not by changing the world, but by changing how we see it. Pain, loss, hardship, these are not evil in Chrysippus' view. They are simply facts of existence, woven into the fabric of reality. What matters is how we respond. Like earlier Stoics, Chrysippus taught that virtue is the only true good. Wealth, health, even life itself, these are preferred, but not necessary for happiness. True contentment comes only from wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, the four unshakable pillars of the Stoic life. Chrysippus wrote prolifically, producing over 700 works. Though most are lost to time, yet his influence endured. Without him, Stoicism may have faded into history. Because of him, it became one of the most powerful and enduring philosophies ever created. Where Diogenes found freedom by stripping life down to its barest form, Chrysippus found clarity in order, reason, and structure. And while Stoicism focused on living in harmony with nature through logic and virtue, another school was emerging, one that saw life not as a puzzle to solve, but as a stage to act upon. From the sharp mind of Chrysippus, we now move toward the more theatrical world of epic theater and emotional expression, guided by a different kind of wisdom, one shaped not by detachment, but by passion. Boethius, the consolation of philosophy. Imagine everything you once had, your power, your titles, your freedom, taken from you in an instant. You sit in a prison cell, condemned to die, betrayed by those you once trusted. This was the world of Boethius, a Roman statesman and philosopher in the twilight of the ancient world. And it was in this darkest hour that he wrote one of the most profound meditations in history, The Consolation of Philosophy. As he waited for execution, Boethius didn't turn to anger, revenge, or despair. He turned inward and began a dialogue with philosophy herself, imagined as a wise and comforting woman who visits him in his cell. Together, they explored the nature of fortune, suffering, and the soul's pursuit of truth. Boethius asked, "Why do good people suffer, while the wicked seem to thrive? Why is life so unpredictable, so cruel? Why does fate turn without warning? Philosophy answered gently. Fortune, she said, is like a spinning wheel. It turns constantly, lifting some, lowering others. Those who build their happiness on fortune build it on shifting sand. True happiness, she reminded him, does not come from power, wealth, or fame, because these can be taken away. Real happiness must come from within, from something unchanging, something that no one can steal. Boethius came to see that the only lasting good is found in virtue, in the pursuit of wisdom, and in alignment with a higher order, an eternal reason behind the chaos of life. Even in chains, he was free, because freedom, to Boethius, was not the absence of restraint, it was the ability to rule oneself with reason. In his reflections, Boethius bridged the ancient world of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics with the rising Christian worldview. Though he never quoted scripture in his consolation, his ideas would become deeply woven into the fabric of medieval Christian philosophy. To him, God was not distant. God was pure reason, the source of all order, and in understanding that order, we could find peace even in the face of death. Boethius faced the end not with terror, but with calm. He had found something deeper than hope. He had found consolation. And while his voice spoke from a cell, his words would echo through cathedrals, universities, and quiet minds for over 1,000 years. From the sorrow of Boethius, we now drift toward a world of structure and clarity, a thinker who would shape the very framework of theology and reason in the West, a man who asked not only how to believe, but how to think about belief. Averroes' reason and religious authority. What happens when reason and faith collide? When logic begins to ask questions that scripture cannot easily answer? For Averroes, a philosopher, jurist, and physician of medieval Andalusia, the answer was clear. Reason must lead. Living at the crossroads of Islamic, Jewish, and Christian thought, Averroes, known in the West as Ibn Rushd, became one of the most daring defenders of rationalism in the medieval world. He believed that truth is one, and that if both philosophy and religion seek truth, then they cannot truly contradict each other. But when they seem to, Averroes argued that philosophy, guided by reason and logic, must be trusted to interpret religious texts, not the other way around. His bold stance placed him in the heart of a centuries-old debate. Should faith be interpreted by scholars of scripture or by philosophers of reason? Averroes leaned toward the latter. He saw Aristotle as the highest model of human reason, a thinker whose logic, if understood properly, could illuminate even the deepest mysteries of the universe. He devoted much of his life to writing detailed commentaries on Aristotle's works, striving to reconcile the ancient Greek worldview with Islamic theology. For Averroes, philosophy was not a threat to religion, it was its ally. The Quran, he believed, encouraged deep thought and reflection. So, to question, to reason, to seek understanding, these were not acts of defiance, but acts of devotion. Still, not everyone agreed. His writings sparked intense controversy. Many theologians saw his ideas as dangerous, a challenge to religious authority and tradition. Eventually, his works were banned in parts of the Islamic world, but in Europe, especially among Jewish and Christian scholars, Averroes' ideas found a second life. Thomas Aquinas would argue with him on paper. Maimonides would absorb and respond to his views, and through them, his defense of reason would ripple through centuries of Western philosophy. Averroes believed that the human mind was a gift, a divine instrument for discovering the order of creation. To silence it was not piety, it was fear. And though he lived in a time of religious tension and political uncertainty, Averroes never gave up on one simple idea, that truth and reason belong together. From the voice of rationalism, we now move into a new era, one where the language of philosophy begins to shift. From theological reflection to scientific method, from faith and metaphysics to observation and doubt. Avicenna, Islamic metaphysics, and the nature of the soul. Imagine total silence. No sound, no sight, no touch, no people, no body, just awareness floating in emptiness. Would you still know that you exist? This was the thought experiment posed by Avicenna, one of the most profound thinkers of the Islamic Golden Age, a philosopher, physician, and scientist whose ideas echoed through centuries. Known in the West as the father of early modern philosophy, Avicenna built a bridge between Aristotelian logic, Neoplatonic metaphysics, and Islamic theology, creating a vision of the soul and the universe that would shape minds for generations. At the heart of his philosophy was a simple, yet powerful question. What is the self? To answer it, Avicenna imagined the floating man, a person created fully formed, suspended in air, with no senses, no memory, no contact with the external world. Could this person still know they exist? Yes, Avicenna argued. Even stripped of all physical experience, the person would still possess a deep, inner sense of being. This, he claimed, was proof of the soul, something immaterial, independent of the body, and fundamentally aware. To Avicenna, the self was more than a collection of sensations. It was a conscious essence, untouched by the material world. But Avicenna was not only a metaphysician. He was also a scientist, a doctor, and a polymath. His monumental work, the Book of Healing, was a vast encyclopedia of logic, physics, medicine, and philosophy. Within its pages, he blended reason with revelation, logic with belief. One of his most groundbreaking ideas was the distinction between essence and existence. He taught that everything in the world has essence, what a thing is, and existence, whether it is real. For example, a unicorn has an essence. We can imagine it, define it, even describe its behavior, but it lacks existence. It doesn't actually exist in the real world. This distinction led to one of his most influential arguments, the concept of God as the necessary existence. He reasoned that everything in the universe is contingent. It could exist, or it might not. But something must exist by necessity, something that does not depend on anything else to be. This, Avicenna said, is God, a being whose essence and existence are one and the same. His vision of the divine and the soul was not just spiritual, it was logical, rational, and precise. These ideas would later influence Jewish, Islamic, and Christian thought alike. Even Thomas Aquinas, centuries later, would draw heavily from Avicenna's reasoning. Avicenna showed that faith and reason were not at odds. To him, they were partners, two paths to the same truth, but not everyone agreed. Another thinker, Averroes, would take a more daring path. He argued that reason should not just support faith, it should stand above it. From the quiet metaphysics of the soul, we now move into a more radical territory, to a man who questioned the very limits of religious authority. Augustine of Hippo, the struggle between faith and reason. What if the deepest truths of life could never be proven? What if reason alone could not carry us to the answers we seek about existence, morality, or the nature of the divine? For Augustine of Hippo, this wasn't just a philosophical puzzle. It was the defining tension of his life, a lifelong journey between two powerful forces, faith and reason. Born in the 4th century, Augustine was a man caught between worlds, between the discipline of philosophy and the devotion of religion, between the desires of the flesh and the longing of the soul. He studied deeply, absorbing the idealism of Plato, the logic of Aristotle, and the Stoic pursuit of self-control. Yet none of these could satisfy the yearning in his heart, the need for meaning, for peace, for something beyond intellect. His search led him through many paths. He explored Manichaeism, a dualistic religion that saw the world as a battlefield between light and darkness. He studied Neoplatonism, which taught that all things emanate from a single, perfect source. But still, the answers eluded him, until, slowly and painfully, Augustine turned to Christianity. Yet he didn't arrive as a passive convert. Augustine questioned, challenged, and struggled. He needed his faith to be more than blind devotion. It had to make sense. And so, he did what few had dared before him. He sought to unite the logic of classical philosophy with the faith of Christian belief. One of his greatest struggles was the age-old question of evil. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does evil exist? Why do the innocent suffer, while the wicked prosper? Augustine's answer was profound. Evil is not a thing. It is an absence, like darkness is the absence of light. To Augustine, God created humans with free will, the power to choose. And with that freedom comes the possibility of turning away from goodness. Not because God wills it, but because freedom without the possibility of failure is not freedom at all. This idea, that evil is the absence of good, not its opposite, would echo through the centuries, shaping the core of Christian theology. But Augustine's struggle didn't end there. He believed that faith and reason are not enemies, but partners. Reason could carry the mind to great heights, but beyond a certain point, only faith could carry the soul further. In his most famous work, The Confessions, Augustine laid bare his inner life, his doubts, his failures, and his transformation. "You have made us for yourself, O Lord," he wrote, "and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." These words, whispered from the depths of longing, became a cornerstone of Western thought. Augustine's writings would influence generations, from Thomas Aquinas to the great medieval scholars, and lay the foundation for much of Christian philosophy. Where others divided logic and belief, Augustine built a bridge. But not all philosophers chose that path. Some would look to reason alone, turning away from divine faith and placing their trust in human understanding. From Augustine's search for spiritual peace, we now move to a man who, facing exile and death, turned to philosophy as his only refuge. Plato, The Theory of Forms and the Republic. What if everything you see, everything you touch, everything you think you know, is only a shadow? A faint echo of a deeper truth that lies just beyond your senses. This is the world of Plato. To Plato, the physical world, the one we live in, breathe in, and experience every day, is not the true reality. It is only a reflection, a dim and fleeting image of something much more real, much more perfect. This idea formed the heart of his philosophy, known as the theory of forms. According to Plato, every object we encounter is merely an imperfect copy of a perfect, eternal form. The chairs we sit on are reflections of the ideal form of chair. The acts of courage we witness are glimpses of the pure form of courage. Beauty, justice, love. All of these have perfect versions that exist beyond our world, in a higher realm accessible not through sight, but through reason. In his famous allegory, the allegory of the cave, Plato painted a haunting picture of the human condition. Imagine people born and raised inside a dark cave, chained so they can only see the wall in front of them. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners are objects being moved, casting shadows on the wall. The prisoners watch these shadows all their lives and believe them to be the only reality. But what if one prisoner is freed? What if he turns around, sees the fire, walks out of the cave, and encounters the dazzling light of the sun, the source of all truth and life? To Plato, the journey out of the cave is the journey of the soul seeking truth. It's painful, it's disorienting, but it leads to enlightenment, to the understanding that the world we take for granted is not the whole picture. And in the Republic, Plato takes this vision even further. He imagines an ideal society, ruled not by those who seek power or wealth, but by philosopher kings, individuals who have ascended out of the cave, who have seen the truth, and who return not to dominate, but to guide. To rule wisely, Plato argued, one must first know what justice truly is, not just how it appears, but what it is in its purest form. For Plato, justice was not simply laws or punishments, but a kind of harmony, a balance between the parts of the soul, reason, spirit, and desire, mirroring the balance in a well-ordered society. But this vision was more than a blueprint for politics. It was a metaphor for the inner life. Plato's Republic was as much about governing the soul as it was about governing a city. In a world where appearances deceive and truth hides in abstraction, Plato urged us to look beyond the surface, to question, to seek, to remember that real wisdom does not come from what is seen, but from what is understood. And as you drift now, slowly, into the quiet space between waking and dreaming, imagine the cave dissolving. Imagine stepping into that higher realm, where beauty is not fleeting, where justice is not debated, where truth simply is. Let the questions rest with you. What shadows have you mistaken for reality? And if you stepped into the light, would you recognize the truth? The Buddha, the middle way, and the nature of suffering. In a quiet grove under a Bodhi tree, a man once sat in stillness, not to conquer the world, but to understand it, not to seek power, but to find peace. That man was Siddhartha Gautama, the one who would become the Buddha. He had known luxury as a prince, and he had tasted deprivation as an ascetic. But in both extremes, he found only emptiness. And so, he discovered something far more profound, the middle way, a path not of indulgence or denial, but of balance, of clarity, of awakening. At the heart of his teaching lies a simple truth. Life contains suffering, not as a punishment, not as a curse, but as a reality woven into the fabric of existence. We age, we lose, we desire, and from this longing, this clinging to what is fleeting, comes our pain. But the Buddha didn't leave us in sorrow. He offered a way through it. He spoke of the Four Noble Truths, that suffering exists, that suffering arises from craving, that suffering can end, and that there is a path to its end. This path, the Eightfold Path, is not a set of rigid rules. It is a gentle invitation to live with mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. right concentration. Each step is a return to balance, a movement away from grasping, away from aversion toward the steady peace of presence. The Buddha taught that nothing is permanent, not joy, not sorrow, not even the self. All things arise and pass like clouds drifting through the sky. And when we cling to what is passing, we suffer. But when we let go, we awaken. To be awake is not to escape the world. It is to see it clearly, to breathe in the present moment, to meet life as it is, without judgment, without resistance. In the silence of night, this message takes root. You do not need to fix everything. You do not need to carry the past or chase the future. You are here, now, and that is enough. Let your breath be your anchor. Let stillness be your teacher. And as the mind grows quiet, let go of all striving. The Buddha's gift is not a promise of perfection, but the possibility of peace, the gentle unfolding of awareness, the end of suffering through understanding. And now, from the ancient paths of India, we step into another world, one of reason, of logic, of disciplined thought and emotional resilience, a world shaped by the Stoics, Confucius, the Analects, and moral harmony. What makes a person good? For Confucius, the answer was not found in isolated thoughts or in abstract ideals. It was found in the spaces between people, in the warmth of a respectful bow, in the silence between wise words, in the quiet consistency of duty, tradition, and moral conduct. Where Aristotle emphasized reason and balance, Confucius turned to the heart of human life, relationships. He lived in a time of great unrest, in a society that felt fractured and uncertain. But instead of calling for rebellion or radical change, Confucius called for restoration, a return to harmony, to order, to the inner stability that grows from virtue practiced not in isolation, but in community. At the center of his teachings was a single concept, Ren, a word often translated as benevolence, humaneness, or deep empathy. Ren was the expression of compassion through action. It meant treating others as you would treat your own family, not just being kind when it was easy, but consistently choosing respect, patience, and grace, even when no one was watching. And guiding this way of being was the ancient wisdom of the Analects, a collection of Confucius's thoughts, questions, and teachings, quietly passed down through generations like a whisper of guidance through time. To Confucius, morality wasn't a set of rules to be enforced. It was a path walked daily, cultivated through ritual, education, and reflection. It was found in the simple acts, honoring one's parents, speaking with sincerity, leading with humility. He believed that how we live is not just a reflection of character, it is the shaping of it. His philosophy rested on five central relationships: parent and child, ruler and subject, elder and younger sibling, friend, and husband and wife. In each, there was a balance, a mutual responsibility. When these relationships were strong, society was strong. When they were neglected, disorder would grow. Unlike the dramatic upheavals imagined by other philosophers, Confucius envisioned something quieter, a revolution not of violence, but of example. The leader who leads with virtue will inspire virtue. The child who honors the parent will one day be honored in return. Harmony begins at home and spreads outward like ripples across a still pond. And though he never claimed to be divine or to possess secret knowledge, his influence was profound. For thousands of years, his words would shape the moral fabric of East Asian cultures. not with force, but with the enduring power of gentle wisdom. In the stillness of night, Confucius reminds us that a life of meaning is not necessarily loud or heroic. Sometimes it is found in a quiet choice, a respectful silence, a commitment kept. Let that thought settle now, like a soft breeze over calm water, a reminder that your life, too, ripples outward, that your presence matters, that harmony is not far, it begins with you. And as we move on, we travel westward again into a new kind of silence, one not of order or virtue, but of stillness, of letting go, of watching the world unfold without clinging. Aristotle, Virtue Ethics, and the Golden Mean, where Plato envisioned perfect worlds beyond the senses, Aristotle turned his gaze firmly toward the world we live in. No hidden realms, no mystical ideals, only people, in all their complexity, striving, choosing, struggling to live well. To Aristotle, philosophy was not an escape from life. It was a guide for how to embrace it, how to master it. He believed that to live a good and meaningful life, we don't need divine commandments or abstract theories. What we need is virtue. But Aristotle's idea of virtue was not about blind obedience to rules. It wasn't about being flawless or morally rigid. It was about balance, about harmony in the soul. Consider courage. Too little courage, and one becomes timid, paralyzed by fear. Too much courage, and one becomes reckless, charging into danger without thought. True courage lives somewhere in between. This principle extended to every part of life. Ambition, for example, if you lack it, you drift through life without direction. But if you chase it obsessively, it consumes you. The key is in the balance. This delicate point of equilibrium between deficiency and excess is what Aristotle called the golden mean, a path of moderation cultivated not by accident, but through intention, discipline, and practice. Because for Aristotle, virtue was not something you were born with, it was something you became. Just as a musician must practice to master an instrument, or an athlete must train to shape the body, a virtuous person shapes their character through action, repeated daily with care. It wasn't only the individual that Aristotle sought to understand. He looked outward as well, toward society, politics, and governance. While his teacher Plato imagined an ideal city ruled by philosopher kings, Aristotle believed that a government should reflect the people it served. He studied existing systems carefully, evaluating their strengths and flaws, and in his reflections, he envisioned the best form of governance not as any one model, but as a blended system, part democracy, part aristocracy, part monarchy, each balancing the excesses of the others, a system that could adapt, evolve, and serve the common good. But Aristotle's curiosity didn't stop with ethics or politics. He was captivated by everything: logic, biology, physics, poetry. No domain was too small or too vast. Where Plato looked beyond the senses, Aristotle peered into them. He observed, measured, described. He classified plants and animals, studied the motion of objects, formulated rules of logic, and laid the first stones of what would become the scientific method. For Aristotle, philosophy was a map, a way to navigate the real world with clarity. His teachings weren't just for scholars in ivory towers. They were meant for artists and merchants, leaders and laborers. Anyone, he believed, could cultivate a life of meaning if they were willing to think. to act, and to grow. And so his legacy endures, not just as a thinker, but as a guide, a steady voice reminding us that a good life is not about perfection, but about progress, not about escaping reality, but about engaging it with wisdom, patience, and virtue. And as we drift deeper into thought and into rest, we turn from Aristotle's world of reason and balance to another ancient voice, one who looked not just within the self, but into the fabric of human relationships, one who taught that the soul of a society is found not in laws or systems, but in the quiet power of respect, duty, and shared harmony. Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching, and the way of nature. There is a silence deeper than speech, a stillness that moves through all things, yet never strains to be seen. It is the silence of flowing rivers, of falling leaves, of the wind passing through empty spaces. And to Lao Tzu, this was the voice of truth, not spoken, not taught, but felt. Lao Tzu, the ancient sage of Taoism, did not offer commandments or structured systems. He gave the world something much gentler, the Tao, the way, the Tao Te Ching. His small and mysterious text doesn't shout, it whispers, it invites, it asks us not to control life, but to flow with it, not to conquer the world, but to become one with it. According to Lao Tzu, all things rise and fall according to the Tao, an invisible, eternal rhythm behind all creation. It cannot be grasped, named, or forced. The moment you try to define it, you lose it. And yet, when you let go, you find it all around you. Water, he said, is the perfect image of the Tao, soft, yielding, humble, yet capable of wearing down mountains. It moves without resistance, finding its path through the smallest cracks. It nourishes all things, yet asks nothing in return. True strength, Lao Tzu taught, lies not in domination, but in gentleness. To live according to the Tao is to embrace Wu Wei, a way of effortless action, not inaction, but flowing with the current rather than swimming against it. It is living simply, speaking little, acting only when the moment calls, and never more than is needed. The wise, Lao Tzu said, are like the valley, not the peak. They do not seek to be seen, and so they are never diminished. They hold to humility, and so they are never empty. They lead without controlling, give without demanding, exist without clinging. Where others seek greatness, Lao Tzu seeks emptiness. Where others fight for control, he teaches surrender, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. For the world is not a problem to be solved. It is a mystery to be observed, respected, and gently followed. And in the stillness of night, when thoughts quiet and the mind softens, his message feels closest. You do not need to push so hard. You do not need to chase so much. What is meant for you will find you, like a river returning to the sea. Breathe, let go, let the world be as it is. And now, as we continue our journey through the minds that shaped humanity, we move from the quiet valleys of Taoism to the disciplined heights of another ancient path, a path of mindfulness, detachment, and inner clarity. Friedrich Nietzsche, The Will to Power, and The Death of God. Imagine waking up to find that everything you've ever trusted, every belief, every law, every moral certainty, was built on a fragile illusion. This is the unsettling reality Friedrich Nietzsche stared into, a world, as he declared, where God is dead, and we have killed him. But Nietzsche wasn't speaking of the death of a literal deity. He was speaking of something far more profound, the unraveling of the very foundation upon which humanity had built its values. For centuries, morality had rested upon religious authority, divine commandments believed to come from above. But what happens when faith dissolves? When belief in that higher order begins to fade? For Nietzsche, the answer was as terrifying as it was inevitable. Without a universal moral compass, society risked slipping into nihilism, a bleak landscape where life feels empty and meaningless. And yet, in that void, Nietzsche didn't see only despair. He saw a test, a calling. If meaning could no longer be handed down from the heavens, then it must be forged from within. This is where he introduced one of his boldest and most controversial ideas, the will to power. Not a will to merely survive, not a thirst for brute strength, but a deep, intrinsic drive to overcome, to transcend limitations, to shape reality through the force of one's own creative spirit. In Nietzsche's view, the most powerful force in human nature wasn't the instinct to endure, it was the compulsion to become, to rise, to assert one's essence upon the world. But if the old moral structures were gone, what then becomes of right and wrong? Nietzsche challenged the morality of his time, what he called slave morality, a system that prized meekness, humility, and submission. He saw these traits not as virtues, but as symptoms of a society shackled by fear and weakness. In place of this, he envisioned a new kind of human being, the Burmensch, or overman, someone who doesn't merely accept values, but invents them, someone who lives not by inherited truths, but by self-authored purpose, a figure of strength, creativity, and radical independence. To some, these ideas felt dangerous, like a blueprint for chaos, a world where might makes right. But Nietzsche's writings were never meant to be dogma. They were not instructions, but provocations, challenges to awaken the sleeper. His question was never, how should we destroy morality? But rather, if the old gods are gone, what new ideals will you create? In his lifetime, Nietzsche's work was largely misunderstood. Many twisted his thoughts into grotesque ideologies he would have abhorred. That is the peril of powerful ideas. Once set loose, they evolve, take shape in ways the thinker never imagined. And so we move from the philosopher who deconstructed inherited truth to one who sought to reconstruct the very nature of reality itself, a thinker who invited us into a world of symbols, illusions, and deeper truths beneath the surface of what we see. Jean-Paul Sartre, Existentialism, and the Burden of Freedom. What if there is no map, no cosmic blueprint, no grand design waiting for you to discover your purpose? This was the world of Jean-Paul Sartre, a world where existence comes first, and meaning must follow. To Sartre, there was no fixed essence to human beings. We are not born with a pre-written purpose. We are simply thrown into existence, and it is through our choices, through our actions, that we become who we are. Existence precedes essence. That was his claim. You exist first. You define yourself later. It is a radical kind of freedom, and a terrifying one, because if nothing is predetermined, then everything is your responsibility. There is no God to hand down values, no fate to excuse our mistakes, no divine order to explain away our fears. You are free, utterly, unavoidably free. And yet, Sartre did not celebrate this as liberation. He saw it as a burden, a weight each of us must carry. He called it anguish, The quiet dread of knowing that every decision you make helps shape not just your life, but what it means to be human. You are not only choosing for yourself, you are, in some way, choosing for all. He spoke of bad faith, a kind of self-deception, where we pretend we have no choice, where we let the world, or tradition, or fear dictate our lives, so we can avoid the anxiety of freedom. But to live in bad faith, Sartre warned, is to turn away from our humanity. True authenticity means accepting the weight of freedom, facing the void, and building something in its place, not because the universe demands it, but because you choose it. This was not a call to despair. It was a call to create, to become the author of your life, to live not as an echo, but as a voice. And in the soft darkness of night, this message takes on a quiet power. You may not know your path. You may feel uncertain, unfinished, alone, but you are free. And within that freedom lies the seed of purpose, not found, but made. Let that truth cradle you, not as a burden, but as a gentle invitation to be, to become, to begin again. And as this night deepens, we drift onward from existential weight to the lightness of being, where questions of meaning are not answered by logic or freedom, but by relationship, connection, and the beauty of small moments. Epicurus, the path to tranquility and simple joys. What if true happiness wasn't hidden in riches, fame, or power, but in something far more gentle? A calm life, a warm meal, and the quiet company of trusted friends. This was the profound belief of Epicurus, a philosopher who chose inner peace over ambition and simplicity over chaos. While many philosophers were tangled in debates about justice, politics, and morality, Epicurus quietly stepped away. Instead of entering the noisy halls of power, he planted a garden, a real one, where he and his followers lived, learned, and pursued what he believed all human beings truly crave, peace of mind. But don't mistake him for a lover of wild indulgence. Epicurus was no hedonist in the way people often imagine. For him, pleasure didn't mean excess. It meant relief from suffering. It wasn't about luxury, but about being content. A sip of cool water when you're thirsty, a simple meal when you're hungry, a heartfelt conversation with a friend. These, to Epicurus, were life's most precious pleasures. At the core of his teachings was ataraxia, a deep, unshakable calm of the soul. To reach this serene state, Epicurus taught that we must let go of fear, unnecessary cravings, and the illusions that cloud our minds. He identified three major barriers to happiness. First, the fear of the gods. Epicurus believed that if gods did exist, they lived far removed from human affairs. They neither punished nor rewarded us, so fearing their judgment was unnecessary and unhelpful. Second, the fear of death. To Epicurus, death should not frighten us. When we are alive, death is not here, and when death arrives, we are no longer here to feel it. Third, the chase for things we don't need. Wealth, luxury, social status. These don't bring lasting joy. In fact, the more we chase them, the more restless we become. Often, it's the most modest life that brings the deepest fulfillment. His ideas were radical. He dismissed superstition, stepped away from political ambition, and opened his school to everyone, including women and slaves, a rare act of inclusion in his time. Yet despite his focus on calm and moderation, Epicurus was often misunderstood. Critics painted him as a reckless pleasure seeker, mistaking his message for indulgence. But Epicureanism was never about chasing every pleasure. It was about discovering which pleasures are truly worth seeking. His quiet wisdom would later ripple through the worlds of science, ethics, and psychology, forever changing the way we think about happiness. And while Epicurus found peace in simplicity and gentle pleasures, another great thinker sought serenity in a different way, not through comfort, but through discipline, logic, and inner strength. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations and the Stoic Mind. Imagine a man who ruled the most powerful empire on earth. Armies obeyed his command. The fate of nations rested in his hands. And yet, each night, in the quiet hours before dawn, he wrote, not orders, not decrees, but reflections. His name was Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, student of Stoicism, and seeker of peace, not through power, but through self-mastery. His journal, known today as Meditations, was never meant for others. It was a conversation with himself, a reminder of how to live, how to think, how to remain calm in the face of chaos. At the core of Stoicism lies a simple distinction: what you can control and what you cannot. You cannot control the weather. You cannot control what others do, or say, or think, but you can control your response, your actions, your thoughts. This was the Stoic mind, calm amidst the storm. Marcus reminded himself daily, you are mortal, you are temporary. Everything you love, everything you fear, will pass. And that is not a reason for despair. It is a reason to live fully, gratefully, honestly. He believed that the only true good is virtue, wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. These are not given, they are practiced, day by day, through choices made in silence. To him, suffering was not something to be avoided. It was a forge, shaping character. Misfortune was not the enemy, it was the test. He wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength, even in pain, even in loss, even in betrayal. The Stoic does not seek comfort in illusions. He seeks clarity. He wakes each day asking, what is in my control? What is right? What is necessary? And as he drifts to sleep, he lets go of all that he cannot change. For Marcus, philosophy was not for debate halls. It was for life, for battlefields, for illness, for grief. It was armor for the soul. It was the still point in a turning world. And as you listen now in the hush of your own evening, his words become a whisper across time. Let go of what burdens you. Hold fast to what makes you good. Do not fear the end. Fear never having lived as you were meant to. Breathe. Be still. You are enough. And now, with the echo of Stoic wisdom fading into the night, we move from the Roman emperor to the modern world, a place where meaning, identity, and truth itself are called into question, where existence begins with a question, not an answer. Pyrrho of Elis, the quiet power of doubt. While Stoics searched for strength through reason and self-control, Pyrrho of Elis took a very different path. He believed that the wisest thing anyone could do was to doubt everything. Where others looked for truth through logic or virtue, Pyrrho questioned whether truth could be known at all. He returned from his travels in the East deeply changed, influenced by the calm detachment of Buddhist thinking. And from that, he began to shape a radical philosophy of his own, skepticism. Pyrrho saw the world as full of uncertainty, For every belief, there was a counter-belief. For every truth, an argument against it. He noticed how easily people clung to their judgments, and how much anxiety came from the need to be right. So he offered a different approach. Suspend judgment, let go of certainty, and find peace in not knowing. To Pyrrho, tranquility didn't come from mastering logic or accumulating knowledge. It came from letting go of the need for answers. When we stop insisting that things must be a certain way, when we stop dividing the world into good and bad, true and false, we begin to relax into the mystery of life. This state of peaceful detachment, which he called ataraxia, was the goal of skepticism. Not confusion, not nihilism, but serenity through silence. A quiet mind, no longer disturbed by the storms of opinion. Pyrrho lived his philosophy with astonishing commitment. He avoided strong beliefs. He trained himself not to react with distress or excitement. And though many thought him strange, even impractical, he radiated a deep calm that few could ignore. While Stoicism taught us to stand firm like a rock in the waves, Pyrrhonism invited us to float, to stop resisting the current and drift with ease through the unknown. His ideas would go on to inspire later skeptics, philosophers, and even scientists, reminding us that sometimes wisdom means stepping back, letting go, and finding peace not in certainty, but in stillness. And so, from the lush gardens of Epicurus to the open columns of Zeno and the silent spaces of Pyrrho, we trace a journey through the great minds of ancient philosophy, each offering a different path toward the same destination. Martin Buber, I and thou and the sacred encounter. Not every truth is found in solitude. Not every path leads inward. Sometimes meaning unfolds not in silence, but in relationship. This was the vision of Martin Buber, a philosopher of presence, of encounter, of the spaces between souls. At the heart of his thought was a simple idea. There are two fundamental ways we relate to the world, two ways of being. I-it and I-thou. I-it is how we relate to things, to objects, to what we use, analyze, categorize. It's necessary. We all must live in the world, manage tasks, solve problems. But when we only live in the I-it, something vital is lost, because there is another way, I-thou. In an I-thou relationship, we meet not a thing, but a presence, a person, a being, a moment that cannot be measured or possessed. In that encounter, we are not users or observers. We are participants, fully alive, fully seen. It might happen in a quiet conversation, in the way you look into someone's eyes, in the stillness shared between two souls, even in a moment with a tree, a poem, a sunset, if we meet it with openness, without trying to control or name. To Buber, these sacred encounters are where the deepest meaning lives, and in them, he said, we glimpse the eternal thou. We touch the divine not through doctrine or distance, but through relationship, through the now, through connection. He believed that God is not a thing to be proved, but a reality to be met in every genuine moment of love, vulnerability, and presence. The I-thou cannot be forced, it cannot be held, but it can be known. And when it is, the world becomes whole again. Even as you lie here now, listening, breathing, this too is a kind of encounter, a meeting with stillness, with awareness, with being itself. You are not just a thinker, not just a doer. You are a soul in relation. Let go of the noise of analysis. Let go of the need to grasp. Simply meet this moment, not as an it, but it as a thou. And as the veil of night grows softer, we carry this reverence into the final realm, a space where truth dissolves and paradox becomes poetry, where we learn that to speak of reality is to speak in riddles. Zeno of Citium, the roots of Stoic wisdom. Picture this: everything you own, your home, your fortune, your security, vanishes in a moment. For most, this would be a devastating loss. But for Zeno of Citium, it marked the start of something far more meaningful. Once a successful merchant, Zeno's world collapsed when a shipwreck swallowed his wealth. Stranded in Athens, with no possessions and no clear future, he might have given in to despair. But instead, he wandered into a small bookshop, picked up a volume about Socrates, and stumbled upon a philosophy that would reshape not only his life, but the lives of countless others. That philosophy was Stoicism. To Zeno, suffering wasn't caused by outside events, but by our reactions to them. Life, he believed, is unpredictable. Fortunes come and go. We can't control what happens around us, but we can control how we respond. And that, he taught, is where our true power lies. At the heart of Stoicism is a single, powerful truth. We do not control the world. We only control ourselves. A Stoic doesn't fear death, cling to riches, or rage against misfortune. Instead, they turn inward, focusing on their thoughts, their choices, and their character. Zeno believed that living well wasn't about chasing comfort or avoiding hardship. It was about cultivating four essential virtues: wisdom, courage, justice, self-discipline. These became the guiding principles of the Stoic path, a way of life that shaped the thinking of emperors, generals, poets, and philosophers across centuries. Zeno didn't preach from a throne or temple. He had no academy behind closed doors. He taught out in the open, beneath the painted colonnades of Athens, the Stoipoikoi, from which the Stoics would take their name. He spoke to anyone willing to listen, sharing a message of clarity, resilience, and quiet strength. Though Zeno planted the seeds of Stoicism, it was others, Epicurus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, who helped it bloom. They refined its ideas, expanded its reach, and ensured its legacy as one of the most lasting schools of thought in human history. And while Stoicism prized reason, discipline, and mental fortitude, another thinker emerged who challenged all of that, a man who believed that true wisdom came not from certainty, but from doubt. Diogenes of Cynicism, and the rejection of society. Imagine wandering through a bustling marketplace in broad daylight, holding a lantern. People stop and stare. They ask what you're doing, and your answer? I'm looking for an honest man. This wasn't a riddle. It was the way of Diogenes of Sino, a philosopher who didn't merely question society, he outright rejected it. While Pyrrho met the world with doubt, Diogenes met it with defiance. He believed that society, with all its rules, customs, and ambitions, was a fraud, corrupt, artificial, drenched in hypocrisy. He was the founder of Cynicism, a school of thought that taught that freedom and happiness could only be found by stripping away everything unnatural: wealth, status, reputation, even manners. To Diogenes, these were chains. He believed the good life was not about gaining more, but needing less. And unlike many thinkers, Diogenes didn't just speak his philosophy, he embodied it. He gave up all possessions, lived in a barrel, or sometimes a large ceramic jar. He begged for food in the streets of Athens. He owned nothing, feared nothing, and answered to no one. When people told him not to eat in public, he asked, "If eating itself is not shameful, why should eating in the marketplace be?" When others pitied him for his poverty, he replied, "I am not poor, I am free." He challenged respected philosophers, mocked their teachings, and openly questioned social norms. Diogenes lived as though he were nature's own creation, stripped of society's polish, but full of raw, fearless honesty. Perhaps his most famous encounter was with Alexander the Great. Curious about the eccentric philosopher, the emperor approached him and asked if there was anything he could do for him. Diogenes didn't kneel. He didn't flatter. He simply looked up and said, "Yes, step aside. You're blocking my sunlight." To Diogenes, even the greatest king was just another man, tangled in illusions. He believed that to be truly free, one must reject false desires, not just material wealth, but the craving for praise, respect, and acceptance. Everything artificial he cast aside. What remained in his eyes was real life, lived honestly, lived naturally, lived without shame. Though many were shocked by his behavior, Diogenes left a lasting mark. Cynicism would go on to shape Stoicism, early Christian asceticism, and even today's minimalist movements. Where others sought peace through knowledge or self-discipline, Diogenes found it in rebellion, a radical return to simplicity. But not all philosophers turned away from society. One would come who studied it closely, not to mock it, but to master it, a thinker who explored logic, power, and the structure of human reasoning.